This Future Construct podcast episode is supported by Applied Software. Applied Software is on a mission to transform industry by empowering their clients and championing innovation with real-world expert consultants. So visit ASTI.com, it's ASTI.com, and please let them know that we here at Future Construct and BIM Designs sent you. Welcome everyone to the Future Construct podcast. I am your host, Amy Peck. We have a fantastic guest today, Allison Xu, who is an investor at BainCapital Ventures. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you, Amy. I'm really excited to be here today.
So let's dive right in. I was looking at your background. I read some articles that you've written. You're a multi-talented person. So tell us how you got here, because it's been a really interesting journey.
Well, thank you. That's very, very flattering. So my journey. So as you mentioned, I'm currently an investor at BainCapital Ventures. I guess my path to investing, I actually started my career in management consulting. So I was at Bain & Company. And at Bain & Company, much like many other consultants, I did a kind of a host of different types of projects, worked with companies of all different industries. And I think the kind of common thread that I really learned during consulting was how to kind of take a more strategic lens to businesses and kind of evaluate them from the outside in. And that was a skill that I really enjoyed kind of learning, and decided to kind of apply that more full-time and kind of apply that in the investing lens. Part of what I was doing in consulting was actually consulting for private equity firms, and I decided that I'd try my hand at investing myself. So moved over to BainCapital Ventures about 2 years ago, and here focused on investing in B2B software across a number of different verticals.
That's great. And so, I'd love to hear, what are the companies that really excite you? I mean, I read this great article that you wrote in TechCrunch about how construction tech is really booming. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll actually zoom out for a second and kind of apply my investor, kind of BainCapital investor lens. At BainCap, I actually focus on 3 different verticals or 3 different areas of investing. And I think on the outset, they sound different, but there's actually a lot of overlap. And so those 3 are fintech, commerce technology, and then real estate and construction. And I think when there is overlap between those, even though it doesn't sound like those would inevitably be kind of the same, I think there's a lot of companies that fall in 2 of the 3 buckets, or even 3 of all 3 buckets. And I think that's what we really get excited about, seeing certain trends of financial services or financial technology applied to the real estate and construction vertical, or seeing elements of commerce or e-commerce being brought into the real estate and construction vertical. So we spend a lot of time looking at kind of the intersection of all of those different areas.
And then as far as deal flow, where are you finding these companies? I mean, are you they find you, or are you working with different accelerators or other investors? How do they come to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel like I'm going to reveal all my secrets. So don't tell our competitors. But the short answer is it comes from anywhere and everywhere, and all of what you just mentioned. Part of it is founders reaching out to me, and things like these articles in TechCrunch, or even podcasts like this, being able to kind of show the industry that this is a space we're looking at, and having them reach out is always great. Other ways is our construction tech practice, I should say, is focused really more on the growth stage. So we would define that as like Series B and up. But there's obviously a lot of companies out there that are Series A or earlier in pre-seed, and those have investors too. And so a lot of it too is kind of making sure that we have connectivity into the ecosystem of other investors, and whether that's other strategic investors or venture firms that have invested in earlier stage companies, and getting to know their companies that way. And then part of it is just research and reading, and kind of having a pulse on the industry. I think email is one window, and then I always try to have the news on the other window and try to make sure that we're catching interesting companies and interesting things that companies are doing.
That's great. And so do you find, so it sounds like, maybe you see companies that maybe are a little early for where your level of investment would come in, but do you, like to keep an eye on them and they, sort of you watch the evolution and then they sort of hit some of those, revenue benchmarks or business benchmarks that then you say, okay, now it's time.
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty much kind of how we're doing it. I would say that BainCapital Ventures as a whole is actually stage agnostic. I think we have the benefit of being able to be flexible. We don't have any revenue thresholds or check size thresholds that we have to meet. So it really gives us the benefit of being able to look up and down the spectrum and start to get to know companies, even if it's before our construction tech practice might invest, starting to get to know them earlier. And I'd say that every company tends to be a case-by-case basis. So sometimes even if you're small in revenue, you have a lot of traction in other metrics or early signs of customers that maybe you're not monetizing yet. So I think it's a little bit of a case-by-case basis, but we do tend to like to build relationships with the companies that we invest in over time and kind of track their story and really get to know them rather than trying to meet them as soon as they're ready to fundraise and kind of rush to get to know the company.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk again about some of the solutions, that you're finding really interesting and some of the trends. Like what gets you really excited about what you're seeing right now and what are the opportunities?
Yeah. It's kind of a loaded question because I think what we forget is that construction is a huge industry. So I think within construction, it's kind of hard to pinpoint the one or two trends or the one or two things happening, because I think you can dissect it in a lot of different ways. And there's a lot of different ways to look at the market or different kind of sectors, whether that's residential versus commercial versus industrial, or another framework that we like to look at too is this idea of disruption versus enablement. And just to spend a second on that, I think that's a really interesting one that we kind of apply to not just construction, but a lot of different industries where we're looking for both disruptors of the industry as well as the enablers of that industry. And what I mean by that is in a lot of industries, think about, financial services, for example. Construction's a great example. You have incumbent or kind of legacy companies that have been around for a long time and have a way of doing things. And you might have what we call disruptors that come in and just try to throw that out the window and essentially will displace a lot of those companies. So a great example is Airbnb. They really kind of displaced the traditional hotel and lodging industry. But at the same time, you have a lot of what we call enablement, which is not necessarily trying to displace those companies, but actually bringing technology to those legacy companies or kind of incumbent companies and helping them use technology in the 21st century. And so I think what's interesting about construction is I think you see, much like many industries, a little bit of both. And we're constantly looking for the exciting disruptors as well as, I think there's room for both to win. I don't think one is necessarily better than the other. Again, this is a huge industry and a lot of room for many winners. And so I think finding the kind of exciting players on either end is exciting for us.
This episode of the Future Construct podcast is supported by the amazing team at Applied Software. They have solutions for any modern project. Applied Software is on a mission to transform industry by empowering their clients and being the champions of innovation with their real-world expert consultants. They have a comprehensive suite of solutions for AEC, MEP, and manufacturing with a singular focus to help you achieve higher performance. So with software, training, support, consulting, and custom development, Applied Software has you covered for all of your workflow needs. BIM Designs is proud to be a client and partner of Applied Software. So visit their website at asti.com, that's ASTI.com. And don't forget to tell them that we here at Future Construct and BIM Designs sent you. And are you feeling that even with all the new technology that it's really sort of scratched the surface? And again, not even the point being that it's such an enormous industry, which it really is, but that there's just so much room for even one company to solve one problem in somewhere along the workflow. And really make an impact, industry wide. And I know you're not really allowed to play favorites with portfolio companies, but if you're allowed to share even any examples of some of the companies that you're working with who may have had some recent wins or are doing things that you just think are really fascinating and that our audience would be interested to hear about.
Yeah, absolutely. To your first point, I think that's exactly right. I think we're just really scratching the surface of a huge opportunity today. There's a lot of different ways you can use technology up and down the entire construction process. And you can even segment that process, whether it's design to pre-construction to actual execution, and then also across asset classes. I think there's different, there's so many ways to dissect the industry. So to your point, we're really touching the surface today. One company that I do, one of our portfolio companies that I am really excited about and excited to share today is called Material Bank. And they actually are a B2B marketplace for design and construction materials. And I think when a lot of people think of marketplace, I think the kind of default is to think about, they're connecting suppliers to the buyers, and then they just, charge a take rate and kind of adding fees onto that transaction and kind of charging a fee to connect them. But what I think is really interesting about Material Bank, so they actually are connecting interior designers to manufacturers and suppliers of these interior design materials. But rather than charging a take rate and kind of putting themselves as the middleman between those two in the actual transaction, they're actually a materials marketplace for the samples of those goods. And so they're actually taking what used to be kind of a cost center for these manufacturers and turning that into a way for them to, these samples, essentially, turning that into a way to find new business and to essentially kind of like serve as marketing. And it's a really exciting business model. And, we've been excited to watch the journey from their Series B, and recently they just raised their Series C, and they're scaling really quickly across the industry and just kind of transforming the way that interior designers connect with these material suppliers. So
and I love that business model. I think that's really interesting because I do think that there is something challenging about setting out to put yourself in the middle of a transaction, because then for the rest of your existence, both sides are trying to find ways to connect directly without you. So I think that's a brilliant model. Yeah. And, just in terms of looking at the industry and maybe not even through the lens, as an investor, are there trends that, for companies who are in the space, ways that they can actually streamline their business and their workflows? And again, you can pick any of the sectors that you play in, because I think it's valuable to everybody, who might be listening today. But some ways they can think about streamlining their own businesses with some of the technology that you're seeing out there.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of think of the evolution of adopting technology in a couple different phases. And the first is this phase of, I guess, what we call kind of more like analog, of like bringing what used to be pen and paper onto the computer or some type of digital device. And I think a lot of construction is still in this first phase where things are happening offline between people. And there's a lot of solutions out there, whether it's for electrical contractors or GCs in general, or specific subs, whether it's, for your takeoffs, and, it's all kind of just getting something that used to be on pen and paper onto a computer device. And I think that's really exciting. But I think the next phase beyond that, which is where I think we'll see the market kind of go over the next few years, is not only is your data now on the computer, what's amazing about that is that you can now use that data to actually take out insights and make more predictive decision making. And I think we're starting to see some companies emerge in this space of using AI to or using more more formulaic calculation to drive decision making, rather than just being a kind of way to save time and track things, but really a way to make better decisions. So I think that's kind of the evolution. Whether you start with time tracking and you're doing that with your payroll, or you're doing that with your takeoffs and estimation, or your purchase orders, I think there's a bunch of different ways to apply that framework. And I think you'll see software that's kind of dedicated to each of those use cases.
So it's funny, you touched on something that was sort of related to my next question, talking about this move from analog to digital, which I think we underestimate how many companies are still in that analog realm. And and I'm certainly guilty of trying to live my life 20 years in the future and sort of envision where we're going to go and how we get there. But then you did talk a little bit about AI, and so with some of the emerging technologies that are out there between robotics and automation and AI and blockchain and AR VR, are there companies out there that you feel are, and without naming names, but that are using these technologies, but because they're still relatively nascent technologies, that there's a little bit of a reticence and that maybe it's going to take a little longer for those companies to evolve, rather than the companies that are just solving this problem this way today?
Absolutely. I think it's funny, the word AI, I think just like triggers some people too. And there's a little bit of like a negative connotation, because I think, to your point, I think a lot of the industry, they're still focused on step one, and like bringing in too many steps at once is a huge step change for people and for organizations. Each little incremental change is, kind of a big endeavor for you to adopt it at the scale of a lot of these large construction companies. And so I think sometimes doing too much at once is definitely a challenge. I think the degree to which platforms are AI enabled, or kind of using more of these predictive insights too, I think part of it is like, one, how do you connect with your customers? Like maybe you are doing that in a way, but I think the way to reach these customers in construction is not to come with an AI first approach, which might be the case in some other industries. Software and technology, B2B SaaS, like those being one where those are kind of hot buzzwords. I think in construction, it's all about how do you prove your value as a platform, and also how do you make people's lives easier? Technology, I think, sometimes gets a bad rep because people come in and give you a solution and like they want them to adopt it, and it takes time to implement, it takes time to learn. And so I think the best companies out there that are getting adoption within the industry really come from an industry first approach and a user first approach, and are really conscious of like how they are going to market. And it's not about the data and the insights and the predictability from the start. It's about helping people do their jobs easier and quicker and faster.
Well, and you just said the one thing that I think is incredibly valuable. So I will repeat it. It's that it's really a user first approach, and I have found that in our producer BIM Designs, the founder decided to start this company because he had experienced this challenge of really having valuable BIM data during the construction process. So he decided to solve that problem. And I think sort of understanding what the actual workforce and what their workday looks like, and what it's like to actually be out in the field on these construction sites. If you have that understanding, then it's much easier to build a product that actually suits their needs, because a lot of technology, to your point, just becomes a solution looking for a problem. And if you lead with technology, it definitely can be off-putting. But on the flip side of that coin, what are some of the positive impacts of this future technology that you're seeing without leading with the technology first?
Yeah, I mean, I could go on the list. I think, when you have these new systems in place, again, assuming that there's adoption across the industry, I think I was talking to a few GCs back a while ago, and they said the things that we always want to focus on are time, costs, and safety. And so I think those three things are key to why technology is going to help this industry and why successful technologies get adopted, because they help save time, whether that's because there's better tracking and you don't have to spend manual hours looking at things, or if you're actually able to make better decisions that, you can actually cut down on the time in between inspections or the time in between one sub coming in and another. That obviously translates to costs. There's a material financial impact of doing things faster, doing things better, taking up less materials, having less waste. And then I think the third and probably most important is like, how do we make our job sites more safe? And I think with data and with technology on the site, it's not only a matter of real-time tracking. I think there's a lot of IoT software out there that can, track in real time and bring out insights there. But I think also if we take a step back and look at, the data behind it, these certain practices have led to X% less reduction or X% less incidents in safety issues, or even 10 years down the line, being able to track the safety of the building itself. I think that's really powerful because these kind of little changes up front, I think, reap really long-term impacts and benefits down the road.
So everybody, we always get higher listeners when we have people from the investment world, because everyone wants to get on your radar. But without making you crazy, what is actually the best way for companies to approach you personally, but investors in general? Because I've seen good approaches and I've seen poor approaches. But I do think also that investors are all a little bit different too, in how they'd like to be approached, and whether they like direct outreach or through someone. So what are some of the sort of tips you can give to founders out there?
Totally. I've always been someone who kind of preaches the open door, open inbox philosophy, and that most things that come across my inbox, I'll try to read and respond to. And so I do encourage founders to reach out directly when you might not have another intro or kind of someone to connect you. I would say that realistically, of course, it's hard for any investor to either respond or to be able to engage meaningfully with every single kind of cold outreach that they get. And so I think getting to know, before you reach out to an investor, every investor, I would say, has a different focus area, or the things that they're looking for, or the things that they're looking at. I talked a little bit about how, we like to look at the overlap of financial services and commerce technology with construction. And so knowing that might make your business more or less of a fit for BCV at this point, or just me personally. And so I think every investor has a little bit of a different stance. And so being able to know who you're reaching out to and kind of know your audience is also really, I think, important when you are trying to reach out without a kind of warm.
That is such a good piece of advice, and I hope everybody takes heed to that, because I think it's really important for founders to do their homework as well, and read the article that you wrote, the articles that you write, look at your history, look at what your portfolio is, and find out what you care about as an investor. So I think that's fantastic advice for everyone. So we haven't gotten too far into the future yet, But I am going to ask you the question that I ask everyone, which will propel you into the future. So if you can visualize yourself, 15, 20 years from now, and you could have, any experience or any gadget that would just make you personally, your life better or make you happy, what would it be and what would it do?
I love that question. So one thing that I do love, and I hope we'll get back to be able to do more often, is traveling. And I love getting to a new destination. I love exploring the destination. But what I really hate is the packing process before and the unpacking process after the trip. So if I could envision or just create any kind of gadget for myself, just for personal use, I would get a lot of happiness out of some type of automated pick and packer, which can I'm imagining I can just see my entire wardrobe on my phone and just click, click, click. I want these 3 things, and it will just pack it for me and fold it for me. And if it's too big and or it won't fit in my suitcase, somehow shrink it and condense it so that everything I want can fit into my carry-on. That would be my ideal device. And also post-trip, it would also do my laundry and then put it away from me.
Okay, this is my new favorite, because I am right there with you. I think the last year, let's see, probably 2020, I guess, maybe 2019. I think for 3 years running, I did over 200,000 miles. So I am right there with you. So I would literally just have one suitcase packed at home, and then one with me, and then I would drop one, and that would get washed and repacked, and then I would have the other one. But I think maybe we could even do one better, where somehow those articles, you don't even have to carry them, that you choose what they are and they magically appear on the other side.
I love it, Amy.
In your hotel, in your closet, and you walk in and it's there. So
I love that.
I love this idea. I think, someone out there will build it.
Amazing.
That's the goal. Well, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today and getting to know you and hearing about how, your investment strategy and your vision for the future. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been a blast.